Tennessee Titans rookie T'Vondre Sweat has dominated training camp, and the Titans may just have a superstar on their hands. I'll explain why on today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. The Titans had their last training camp practice before their first preseason game on Saturday, and T'Vondre Sweat continued to be the big story. I'll tell you what his coach and his teammates had to say about him on Thursday, and we'll talk about the offensive side of the ball where we focused on the pass, but the Titans' run game has really started to look electric. And then finally, I'll tell you why I'm so excited about Brian Callahan's plan for the first preseason game. Before we get into all of that, I do want to thank you for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. You're not going to beat that anywhere else. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Titans podcast. Speaking of every day, shout out to my everydayers out there tuning in Monday through Friday. If you aren't an everydayer, you need to be one. I'm going to have a bonus episode for you guys tomorrow, breaking down what you need to look for in this preseason game and what I'm most excited about. And then I'll be going live immediately after the preseason game finishes here on the Locked On Titans YouTube channel to break down the performance. So make sure that you don't miss any of the content I'm putting out here on the #1 Tennessee Titans podcast in the world. But with that being said, we got to talk about T'Vondre Sweat. He continues to be the primary storyline of Tennessee Titans training camp. He looks absolutely phenomenal out there, and he is getting high praise from every single angle, specifically in Thursday's practice. According to Teron Davenport from ESPN, T'Vondre Sweat chased Will Levis out of the pocket on one play, and Teron described it as hustle. He was hustling, and I saw Jim Wyatt from TennesseeTitans.com say something similar about T'Vondre Sweat as well. So he continues to impress not only with his abilities, but also with his hustle and his commitment. And you guys know, anyone listening knows that that's what I was worried about with Sweat coming out of college, is that commitment. Is he going to be in shape? Is he going to be in condition? All of that. And if that's there, obviously he has natural talent, but it looks like it's all coming together. And again, I want to get into some of these quotes because Brian Callahan just had great things to say about T'Vondre Sweat. He said, quote, he's getting better at a rapid rate. Quote, he's made a ton of plays over the last 2 days. Another one, it's noticeable his understanding of blocking schemes is growing, not just using his size to beat people. So getting that kind of love from your head coach, I mean, that's great. It's one thing to get it from your coach, though. It's another to get it from your teammates. And Peter Skoronski had a lot to say about T'Vondre Sweat after practice as well. He said, quote, really impressed. He's exceeded my expectations, honestly. He's gotten after it in the run game, and in the pass game, I've been impressed by him too. His ability to get to an edge. There's not a lot of guys that have the size and the speed. The ability to get to the edge in pass pro and run game, he is as stout as can be. That's a really tough 2 guys on the interior to move around. He's definitely exceeded everything I thought he would be. You guys know that I'm a big Peter Skoronski guy, and if Peter Skoronski is saying this about Sweat, who am I to disagree? But T'Vondre Sweat also had some things to say about T'Vondre Sweat. He talked about his conditioning. Sweat said, quote, just staying on my conditioning. Keep pushing myself when I'm tired. I'll just say my conditioning is getting better and better every day. I'm used to it. I did it at Texas. Just coming here, I got to get back in the groove because when you're training for the draft, you're not really training for football. Great getting back in football shape. And they talked to Sweat about how many snaps he could play. He said he could play about 5 or 6 snaps in a row. Brian Callahan said that's about the most that you would want. They want to have a good rotation on the defensive line. You got to keep those guys up front in good shape. And if the Titans really do want to have a limit to where defensive linemen only play 5 to 6 snaps in a row at max, well, that's obviously going to help T'Vondre Sweat with the conditioning and the snap count. It's not even in the plan. So sounds like he's in a good spot with the conditioning. I think Jim Wyatt mentioned that he's probably needs to get in a little bit better shape, maybe lose a little bit of weight going forward, get into the season, but you cannot be upset with where he's at right now. Honestly, I think the most hilarious thing that we heard from T'Vondre Sweat on Thursday was when he was asked about playing in the preseason game without Jeffrey Simmons. I mean, it was an incredible answer. And before I even tell you guys what the answer was, I want to say that keep this in your mind when you hear this answer. To me, T'Vondre Sweat reminds me of Shaquille O'Neal. He gives some Shaq energy, in my opinion, the way that he talks about himself, the way he carries himself, being a larger-than-life guy with a larger-than-life personality to go with it. T'Vondre Sweat was asked if he surprised himself with his early success in training camp, and he said, nah. And then they asked him, are you disappointed that Jeffrey Simmons won't be playing alongside of you in the preseason opener because Simmons is not going to play against the 49ers? And T'Vondre Sweat looked at the camera and said, nah, I'm T Sweat, man. Okay, let's just take a moment and talk about that answer. Are you disappointed that Jeffrey Simmons won't be playing next to you? Nah, I'm T Sweat, man. The dude, again, this is why it gives me Shaquille O'Neal energy. Look, it's not disrespectful to Jeffrey Simmons. Don't take it that direction. Don't make it weird. But he's saying, like, I'm T'Vondre Sweat. What do you mean? Like, I'm going out there to play. Y'all need to be excited to watch me play. It ain't, oh, Jeffrey Simmons isn't with me. Man, I'm T Sweat. I'm playing. Like, that kind of bravado, that kind of confidence. Look, I had somebody ask me about this online when I retweeted that quote out with my reaction that it gives me Shaquille O'Neal vibes. Like, I'm the show. I know it. I'm larger than life in multiple different ways. Like, this is about me, man. I'm the star here. You know what I mean? Like, it's disrespectful to act like I'm second fiddle. Okay, I love that kind of energy. It's absolutely hilarious. But somebody asked me, like, oh, are you starting to like T-Sweat? And I guess for me, it was, I never disliked him as a person. I know that because of my over-the-top reaction to the draft pick, that's the assumption that people made. But I don't know T'Vondre Sweat as a human being, like as a guy, whether I like him or dislike him. I didn't watch like his press conferences at Texas. I'm not a Texas Longhorn guy to like watch all these different videos and stuff. So I knew that he had a larger than life personality from all the scouting reports, but I hadn't, I don't dislike him or like him or as a guy. Like, is he funny? Is he good to like cheer for? Like all that, like that was never part of my equation. So I appreciated the question, but at the same time, that's not really how I've looked at it so far. From having T'Vondre Sweat on the team, hearing some of his answers, hearing the way he carries himself now that he's a little bit more settled and confident, he seems like an excellent guy, a fan favorite, somebody that everyone's going to love. So you combine that personality and that kind of answer with his play on the field so far in training camp. Again, I told you guys that it was going to rain or it wasn't going to rain, and it's drizzling right now. So I'm not going to sit up here and look you in the face and say it ain't raining. T'Vondre Sweat is balling at Tennessee Titans training camp, and I'm excited to watch him play on Saturday. Speaking of that, remember, I'm going to have a bonus episode tomorrow going over what I'm excited about to see in the preseason game. Make sure you don't miss it, but we got to talk about the run game now. Before we do, though, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, whether it be superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need for the prices you want, eBay Motors is the place to go. to make your car the MVP. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Titans fans, let's continue today's recap of training camp practice on Thursday. We talked about T'Vondre Sweat, some of the quotes, not only from Sweat himself, but also from Brian Callahan and Peter Skoronski. Generally speaking, doing a fantastic job through the first couple of weeks of training camp. But now I want to move to the offensive side of the ball and do a couple of defensive notes outside of T'Vondre Sweat as well. Before we get into it, I do want to thank you again for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. You're going to get daily insights for the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. But on the offensive side of the ball, look, all offseason, we have been focused on the passing game. What's Will Levis doing? The new wide receivers, Josh Wiley, all that stuff. Everybody is focused on that. But the last few days, it's been the Titans' run game that has been impressive. Tony Pollard, Tyjae Spears working together, absolutely electric at the end of the day. So according to the reports, we got a 25-yard touchdown from Tony Pollard, 6-yard touchdown from Tyjae Spears. Spears had another nasty run later in practice that went for a touchdown. The Titans are starting to get some movement in the run game, and that goes with Wednesday, where the Titans had some good movement. There was an inside run for Tony Pollard where he made a little jump cut past T'Vondre Sweat with J.C. Latham blocking T'Vondre Sweat, which was a point of conversation online. Someone used it as an example, like T'Vondre Sweat doing it to everybody, even though J.C. Latham won the rep and moved Sweat out of the gap. Now, Sweat obviously was over-aggressive, got his pads high, jumped, moved to the side, but J.C. Latham rode him that direction, and that's part of playing offensive line. You got to use people's leverage against them, and it's not always pretty, but if you move T'Vondre Sweat out of the hole that the running back goes through, that's a win for you, J.C. Latham. But Pollard had a nasty jump cut on the run as well. So we're hearing about the run game kind of picking it up a little bit, and that is exactly what you want to hear. Speaking of the run game, we got to talk about the offensive line. So obviously, things are still up and down on the right side, and Brian Callahan talked about that. He said, quote, "I think I'm content with what I've seen so far, but I think we still need to see more improvement too. It's twofold. I think Nicholas Petit-Ferrer, coming off a long layoff from the spring into now, he's done a nice job. I think he is continuing to get better. He missed a ton of work in the offseason technique-wise." Just to stop in the quote here, think about hitting Bertha and Olga, doing all the different drills that we've seen the Titans offensive line do. Like, NPF hasn't got to do any of that stuff. So he's still working off what he was taught last year, which wasn't great, obviously. So back to the quote here, he's sort of catching up too. He's done a nice job, but I think we still need to get better there. I think Dylan Radins, stepped in and has done a nice job. I think the O-line as a whole, there's always room for that improvement. Those guys on the right side are no different from the left side. There are still plenty of things that J.C. Latham needs to get better at as a rookie. I don't want to single one side out over the other. I think there is plenty of room for improvement across the board. With that being said, I am pleased with the progress that we've made and where we're at with some time still to go. So that is a good thing. So obviously still some concern about the offensive line, but nice to hear that there's been improvement. And with how the run game has looked the last few days, you have to think that's a good sign for the Titans offensive line getting better, doing better. And also we got to just understand the reality. I just talked about how great T'Vondre Sweat has been. That's next to Jeffrey Simmons. Harold Landry is on the team. This may be a more difficult defensive line to deal with than Peter Skoronski and the O-line is going to see on a day-to-day, on a week-to-week basis. You know what I mean? So keep that in mind as well. So love to see that. But it wasn't just the run game. Will Levis had some good throws on Thursday as well. There was a team drill where Levis led the offense all the way down the field for a touchdown. Big play to Calvin Ridley. Had a big play to Traylon Burks that got him inside the 5-yard line, touchdown run by Tyjae Spears. So love to hear all of that stuff. Will Levis was 12 for 15 on the day, according to Jim Wyatt. The offense is just coming together, man, and I'm getting more and more excited by the day for what the offense can be. And here's the great thing. We're going to see a little bit of that offense on Saturday night. Now, I'm going to talk about that to end our show, and I'm going to talk about that on tomorrow's bonus episode as well, previewing the Titans' first preseason game, but you love to hear that. One last thing on the offensive line, though. I got to give credit to J.C. Latham. In Wednesday's camp notes from Jim Wyatt, he said that Latham refuses to be bullied. A couple of times Jeffrey Simmons was getting into it with Peter Skoronski or Cushenberry, and J.C. Latham would come right up there and get in his face. So Latham is not scared. He's ready to play, and that sort of mentality is going to be very important when you get into the season and he goes up against some of the premier pass rushers in the NFL. He's a rookie. He's going to take his lumps, but not being afraid of the moment, not being afraid and not backing down. That's absolutely critical as a rookie in the NFL when you're playing in the trenches. Do want to move to the defensive side of the ball real quick and just give a few notes of some guys who deserve some credit. Number one, Jalen Harrell, the rookie edge rusher out of Michigan, 7th-round pick for the Titans. Brian Callahan singled him out on Thursday and said he has had an excellent camp. Excellent is the quote there. So Jalen Harrell continues to make pressures. Brian Callahan said they see him as a 3-down player. So if you didn't buy into it before, it's absolutely there now. Jalen Harrell's going to make this roster, man. Whether it be the special teams ability, they said he's getting better against the run. He's showed pop as a pass rusher. Might be a late-round masterclass from Ran Carthon, and that's how he cut his teeth and made a name for himself in San Francisco, is hitting on some late-rounders in the draft. So love hearing about that. Harold Landry had a sack as well, according to A to Z Sports. And then finally, Luke Gifford. So we know that the Titans linebackers have dealt with some injuries lately. Garrett Wallow out for the year with a shoulder injury. JoJo Doman has a lower back injury. He's missed some time. And then Cedric Gray has a shoulder injury. And that's going to give some guys lower on the depth chart, like a James Williams, like an Otis Reese, like a Luke Gifford. It's going to give them the opportunity to jump up there and have some better snaps and get some more experience. And Luke Gifford made 2 interceptions on Thursday. He had one against Mason Rudolph and one against Will Levis. The one against Levis, Brian Callahan, I'm pretty sure said that he didn't even know that Luke Gifford could jump as high as he could. Luke Gifford is a really good athlete, and that's why he's been a good special teams player throughout his career with the Dallas Cowboys before coming to the Titans last year, because he's big, strong, and a good athlete. It's the technical side of things that he's got to get better at, and the reason that he hasn't been able to find a home on defense. So good seeing that from Luke Gifford. Also want to give some credit to Gabe Judy Lawley. All 3 quarterbacks got intercepted at one point in time on Thursday, and Malik Willis was one of those guys, obviously, as well. And Gabe Judy Lawley was the guy who got Malik Willis, and the undrafted free agent cornerback out of Tennessee just continues to have a really nice camp for a young player. He's got an uphill battle to make the roster as an undrafted free agent with how good the Titans cornerback room is, but got to give Jalen Harrell his credit for, or not Jalen Harrell, Gabe Judy Lawley a credit for the camp that he's had, because he's gotten noticed and mentioned more often than most undrafted free agent cornerbacks have. Definitely more than like a Robert Javier, even an Anthony Kendall, guys lower on the depth chart who haven't got quite as much pop as a guy like Gabe Judy Lawley has. But with that being said, I do want to go over Brian Callahan's preseason plan for game 1 with you guys and tell you why I'm so excited about what he's decided to do and how much of a breath of fresh air it should be for Tennessee Titans fans. So we'll talk about that now. Before we do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. All right, here's the reality. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire a professional like a professional on LinkedIn. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Also want to let you guys know that today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day, but you should probably never skip therapy day either. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's still hard to make time for it. I've worked with BetterHelp. It was a fantastic experience. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOn and get 10% off your first month today. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. Titans fans, let's continue today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast and cap off this week of the Locked On Titans podcast. Now, I do want to tell you, I am going to have a bonus episode tomorrow previewing the preseason game. I'm going to be going live on the Locked On Titans YouTube channel after the game ends to recap all the action. But then I'm going to be right back at it on Sunday, releasing an episode, getting you guys ready for the week ahead and talking more about the preseason game, joint practices next week with the Seattle Seahawks. That's going to be spicy, that's for sure. You don't want to miss any of the free content I'm putting out here on the #1 Tennessee Titans podcast in the world. So make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed, and thank you for making Locked On Titans your first listen. Now go listen to Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. You're going to get daily insights for the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league. Find the link to Locked On Fantasy Football down in the description, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. But I just want to tell you guys what Brian Callahan had to say about his preseason plan. He said, quote, "The playtime plan for the preseason game against the 49ers, R1's starters, will play to start the game. They'll all dress, they'll all play. I'd like to let them go roughly a series or two, depending on how the series go. And then those guys will be out from the lineup, and the rest of the guys will take over from there. You will see R1s outside of Jeffrey Simmons and Harold Landry on defense, and the guys who have been out will be out." Okay, when he says the guys who have been out will be out, I'm thinking that's L'Jarius Sneed, Jamal Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, obviously, guys who have been kind of missing from practice over the last week or so. So I think that's what he means there. But we'll dive more into who's out at the end of tomorrow's preview episode. I just want to talk about the general philosophy of playing your freaking players. Look, I said this on Twitter. I'm going to repeat it here. The best way to get ready to play football is to play football. Okay, it endlessly annoyed me the last few seasons that Mike Vrabel refused to play his players in the preseason. I mean, last year, it was an absolute mockery. In the very final preseason game, Tannehill went out there for like 4 plays with the starting offense. There were a couple of penalties. The Titans were off the field in 4 plays. It was an absolute disaster. And then those guys never came back out. They just never came back out and played again. And then you go into week 1 and multiple years in a row, Cardinals, Giants, Saints, and the Titans lose, and they look rusty. Think about Ryan Tannehill and how bad he was in week 1 last year. He had wide open people down the field on multiple occasions and missed them because he was rusty and he hadn't played live bullet football in months and months. So I just think it's absolutely absurd to expect your team to be ready to play football by not playing in the preseason in an adequate amount. And the fact that Brian Callahan is totally changing that, not only playing his guys a couple of series, but doing it from the first preseason game, I think that's absolutely fantastic for the Titans and getting them ready to go from week 1. Also want to point out the Buffalo Bills came out and said, yeah, we're probably going to play Josh Allen the first quarter of the preseason game. The Kansas City Chiefs came out and said the Kansas City Chiefs have won back-to-back Super Bowls, and they're playing Patrick Mahomes in preseason games, the first preseason game, because the smart coaches around the NFL understand that to get ready to play football, you have to play football. So thank the heavens above for Brian Callahan. Now, what I will say is we may not see the starters as much next week in the preseason game. Why? Well, the Titans are going to have joint practices with the Seattle Seahawks this upcoming week, next week. So if they're going to get a ton of work in the joint practices and live situations against another team, there's not as big of a need to get your starters out there. So I think the starters might actually play more in this preseason game than they will next week's preseason game, which is going to make it an incredible thing to watch. So excited to dive into that with you guys. Can't wait for the game. Again, I'll be back tomorrow with a preview episode, a bonus preview episode for the preseason game. I'm going to talk about the guys I'm excited to watch most on offense and defense and tell you who is not going to play in the game. So excited for that. And then, of course, my live recap on Saturday night after the game is over here on YouTube. I hope you guys will join me. Make sure you throw a thumbs up on the video, throw a tighten up in the chat. That's going to do it for me today, folks. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.